Every month, Cyber Collective hosts creative research events to educate and inform on technical topics related to data ethics, security, and privacy. Thank you for joining us. Let's jump right in.
So today, your ethics are in retrograde. I need everybody in the chat to tell me who currently uses or has used an online astrology application and who also felt attacked by the most recent Instagram post on Cyber Collective. Our girl Farah came through, definitely felt attacked. And I'm a Cancer, and the whole Amazon, it's a longer story, but all right. Have never used CoStar. Okay, there are a ton of different applications that I'm learning about, right? I've never used any of these apps, but many of my girlfriends are super spiritually aligned, and I do love digging in and reading this information when I can. Right, we're going to talk about specifically astrology apps today. We're going to talk about a lot of things. But most importantly, what we try to do in all of our events is connect the dots about a bigger picture. And that's where this entire, just Cyber Collective as a being, our entire goal to make sure that everybody understands that the way that our data is being collected, understand what's actually happening, and realizing that this is a norm across the board, but what can we do once we learn about this information, right? I'm going to start us off with digging into the privacy policy itself, giving y'all some information, highlighting what this looks like across other applications as well, third-party networks. And then once y'all get familiar with that, we will have our Director of Ethics, Caroline, jump in to highlight some of the language and jargon elements that will help expand on this dialogue, and that's our goal, especially as we're wrapping up this year and moving into 2020 with 2021. Let's get rid of 2020, 2021. There's a lot to do, and we need everyone's help to do so. And so we want to give y'all the tools and the way to be able to talk about this with your peers so that we can just create a larger digital ecosystem. So let's talk about the app itself. And CoStar Astrology's privacy policy is juicy. I went through it. Juicy, but standard, unfortunately, at the same time. We take responsible, reasonable, technical, and organizational precautions to protect the confidentiality, security, and integrity of your personal information. Do you? Do you though? Because we're going to find out. Every app, every privacy policy, they do say that they take reasonable technical and organizational precautions. And that's why later, as Caroline talks about words and how we use them, it's so important to realize the way these larger organizations are using their words to through accepting certain terms and conditions that potentially could be really harmful. So when you look at the application itself, and I want to iterate the fact that I did not test physically the tool or the application itself through any of my testing mediums. This is just me reading the privacy policy and doing research. So I don't know exactly through test what it has access to, but I do know what it says based off of the privacy policy and what we can assume. So just to get into the application itself, you have to insert information that is related to what we call PI, also known as just personal information. And it asks for your birthplace, which for many is a security answer. And if you're not hip to lying on your security answers, or maybe your family had created a bank account on your behalf and use your birthplace as a security answer because that was private information at one point, that is now public. And under CoStar's privacy policy, it says, some of this information may identify you, personal information, and some of this information may not identify you. And they're tagging it as anonymous information. Sometimes, though, anonymous information may directly or indirectly be associated or combined with personal information. And the normal information that you can expect CoStar to collect is your login, your account name, Facebook username, if you connect your Facebook, your birth date, time, place, because you're inserting that information, And you would think that that's all that they're collecting, but it's not. They also collect your IP address, your browser type, operating system and version, location, date, time, activity of each visitor request or anything that you do on the app, whatever referring site brought you there or search engine that brought you there, device type, manufacturer, screen size, language preference, keyword strokes. I mean, it collects everything that you're doing while you have the application open. And for some, that might be really intense to find out about right now. But unfortunately, this is what the norm really is. Here is an example, a screenshot taken. We may allow third-party service providers to use cookies or similar technologies to collect information about your browser activities, blah, blah, blah. The information collected through these cookies are subject to privacy policies of those third parties over which Pattern or CoStar or whatever application has no control. And so they're moving this responsibility element that we'll dig into later, like who is responsible, who's liable of taking care of this sensitive information. And sounds like TikTok and CoStar are besties. Yeah. And the wild part is, and I don't know if my girlfriend Rachel is in here tonight, but she is a privacy attorney. Most privacy policies look like this. This is standard. And as long as it says this, they're allowed to do whatever they want. And because of the need that we have for whatever application it is, we give up certain rights. We accept terms and conditions. And what we need to understand and what's really, really important is this entire ecosystem that applications and us as individuals are a part of. So what happens when an astrology app's third party gets hacked, right? And who are these third parties and what are they doing with your data? Because you're not getting that information through the privacy policy that say CoStar or whatever astrology application that you're opening up. They don't have their partnerships public, right? On CoStar's privacy policy, there is an element that says government requests and mergers. CoStar says, we may share information about you as a part of a merger or acquisition. If CoStar gets involved in a merger, asset sale, financing, liquidation, or bankruptcy, or acquisition of all or some portion of our business to another company, we may share your information with that company before and after the transaction closes. Anything that says may probably is will. You can assume that. And I think that this relays back to something that's happening right now around the Muslim Pro app. There was a Motherboard Vice article that came out about Muslim Pro sharing data with the government and that information allowing for coordinated drone strikes to happen against certain Muslim populations. Now, I have a friend who literally tested the application, reverse engineered it to see exactly whether or not they are sharing information through a third party called Xtan. And that's what happened. Muslim Pro got and this story came out, but Muslim Pro isn't the one directly sharing that information with the government. It's a third party that they're giving information to that is now sharing information with the government. And that's why understanding this entire ecosystem and even your place and your role as an individual is so important, because we all have choices. And I won't dig into it now. Caroline is obviously going to dig into it a bit more as we move forward. But so, I mean, more astrology privacy policies all look like this. And like I said, it's not just privacy policies for this application, it's all of them across the board. And I think what's really important to know is, how is this going to impact us? And that's probably the question that y'all have. Any questions so far about the app, please drop them in the chat. We have all of our amazing co-creators of Psycho that are present with us today, and they'll definitely be able to answer questions, and I'll try to take them as I continue as well. So if you're here because you follow me on Instagram or you follow Cyber Collective or you're a returning guest, then you know that we are screaming the fact that the internet is a medium. It's a tool for so much to happen. And right now, especially, we're seeing it's a medium and tool for a lot of propaganda and potential misinformation that we receive. And this information is driving our cognition, our choices, and a lot of thought leadership that exists today, right? I think Donald Trump is a great example. He's a thought leader, even though so many disagree, but the information that he puts out is what people are receiving to be Bible per se. And understanding that this information at this scale and this speed and what it proliferates, it can truly become so incredibly powerful, and has been and is extremely impactful. How much of this is being controlled by a larger entity? Sometimes I think, if you consider an application like this, right? I'm just going to give an example. So maybe CoStar, and we can assume good intent, right? But maybe there's an astrology application that was started by bad actors, and they wanted information directly from certain groups, and they create this app, and you give up all of this information, access to your phone. Sometimes we're giving up root access into our phones and we don't even realize it. And if you don't know what root access means, it means full fucking access into your phone to everything at the root of it, at the core of it. And there's so much opportunity for manipulation because we don't even realize how swiftly we are manipulated. How many people have the always pan? How many? If y'all know the Instagram always pan, I got by the always pan. That's great marketing. I will say that there's a difference, but you think about the level of influence and what trends and how they spark and expand and explode, right? Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point. The tipping point is a lot easier to reach now than it perhaps once was. And we jump onto bandwagons. So there's a new app, we all jump on the bandwagon. I think TikTok's a great example of this, and we continue to leverage it, but it could be extremely harmful and rooted in something really negative. I'm not saying that it is, but it does have the potential to be so, and do so. So with that being said, understanding how this entire schema works, I am going to hand it off to our Director of Ethics, Caroline. You go ahead and take it away, boo.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Taz. That was awesome. Well, not awesome, but thanks for the presentation. So you kind of touched on this idea of behavioral manipulation, and I wanted to kind of show a really tangible example of this that we encounter pretty much every single day. If you're on Google, if you're on socials, we have just like this constant stream of ads and targeted advertising that comes to us. And so that's another kind of like form of behavioral manipulation. And I also want to underscore the fact that sometimes there are real tangible economic risks that are associated with this. So I want to kind of back up a little bit and just like go zoom out a bit, and let's think about who uses these horoscope apps overwhelmingly. There's an article from the Outline, and they said, it's a lot of women, a lot of people of color, exactly, and a lot of women of color. And I'll just give you like a little, queer folks especially, and I'll give you like a quick example from my life. My late father, I discovered 2 years after he passed that he and my grandmother, when they immigrated to the United States, they actually did this thing called purple star astrology. So that's like how they connected with the Taiwanese community in California after they immigrated. That's like literally, it was like such an important part of my family's culture. And so like, I think in a lot of like cultures, like this is really, really important. And so I've also used CoStar. It's a little too late for me. They already have my information. But when we think about kind of the downstream impacts, when we think about real physical harm, when we think about tangible economic risks, let's also think about the groups of people, women, people of color, queer folks, who are disproportionately impacted by this. And so I wanted to bring up a couple hypotheticals in this scenario. So I don't have proof and I don't know for a fact that CoStar or Pattern or any of the other horoscope apps do this for a fact, but I do know that there has been research that comes out that, and these researchers basically found out that um, ads for higher paying jobs are shown at higher rates to men than they are to women. And so how does this all kind of like connect, right? We're giving up our information. We are we're giving up our information willingly, but we're also like they're collecting all this information about us, whether we know it or not. And so that data gets fed and used to train these algorithms. And these algorithms that decide what ads to show us are based on our data. And this becomes really sketchy because if they know that I'm a woman, then these ads will follow me across the internet, showing me, lower paying jobs than my male counterparts. And so that's one example of a potential tangible economic risk that affects women in particular. And so here's another hypothetical. So predatory lending ads, predatory lending companies, and predatory advertisements are overwhelmingly shown to poor people. And how do they figure this out? Well, basically, when we use these apps, they're collecting our IP information, and this is correlated with our physical location or geographic location. It's not super accurate, but it's accurate enough. And we know also that zip codes, your physical location, correlate highly with wealth and race. And so this ends up targeting exactly, thanks Maggie, yeah, zip codes correlate with your socioeconomic status. And so this, this hurts communities of color, this hurts poor people. And I tested this out actually because I went on Google and I searched, I need money to pay rent. And I wanted to see what came up. And this is what came up. The first three results, these are not the organic search results that pop up. These are advertisements for what looked to me like predatory lending products. And this is maybe not, I'm going to caveat this because this is maybe not the best example. Back in 2015, both Facebook and Google said that they were going to ban these kinds of predatory lending ads on their platforms. But obviously, like this is still happening. I searched this morning. And so there's the potential for serious economic harm in this sense because, these loans, these payday loans with extremely high interest rates, like just hurt the poor. They absolutely hurt the poor, and all that money goes back to the companies that are kind of offering these financial products. So again, these are kind of hypothetical examples. These are real advertisements that get shown on our Google searches, on social media. And I'm not saying that, CoStar and Pattern are linked to this for sure, but this is the potential. This is what our data can do. This is what sharing our data can do. So there are a couple things that I want to do here. And I wanted to introduce some of the ethical tools that we can use. And I want to caveat this and say, this is one of the possible ways that we can kind of approach this. And I will introduce a couple of different concepts that are really, we could spend entire PhD dissertations. We could spend so much time looking at this very small thing about responsibility. And that's like a small thing within ethics. And like, it's just, there's so much to unpack here. So for those of you, yes, I'm definitely Chidi, Taz, you're definitely Eleanor. For those of you who haven't seen The Good Place, Chidi is a moral philosophy professor, and the woman on the right is Simone, his friend who's a neuroscientist, and she's telling him, you philosophers can spend your entire life mulling over a single question, and that's why everyone hates moral philosophy professors. And she's not wrong. And so what I'm going to try to do is take away some of that suffer factor and just make this as accessible as possible to us, because I think they're embedded in all the jargon, embedded in, the hegemony. Like there are some really good tools that you and I can use as we're kind of navigating this world online. Okay, so I want to introduce these concepts: unintended consequences, unequal distribution of harm, and responsibility. And so, again, to give you kind of some background on the purpose why I'm introducing these tools is so that we can equip you to navigate our digital world and also participate in these discussions about tech ethics. So, this is kind of a side note, but as we were putting out that research brief, it really forced us at Cyber Collective to think about, okay, what is our objective as an organization? And we see that there's this massive gap where these technologies impact disproportionately Black, Indigenous people of color, women, queer folks, people with disabilities. Like, that's where the harm is getting distributed. And at the same time, our voices are not really being represented in the tech development and policy process. So that's kind of our goal at Psychos, to shine the spotlight on our voices and make ourselves heard, center ourselves, because we've been pushed to the margins. And part of that is, I would love for us to give us the kind of basic vocabulary around this stuff so that we can participate in these discussions about tech ethics. And so, breaking this down a little bit with unintended consequences, going back to the example of CoStar, I really highly doubt that the creators of CoStar were like, okay, let's see how we can target women and people of color specifically, and like, let's see what kind of harm we can produce for them. I really, really don't think that that was their intent. And while there may be certainly apps out there with that kind of malicious intent, let's be super charitable in this case, just as kind of a thought experiment, right? So these are kind of unintended consequences that disproportionately impact women, people of color, queer folks, and that is our uneven or unequal distribution of harm. And the next piece is the responsibility, right? I want to be super intentional about introducing this concept of moral responsibility, because it is but one way that we can kind of perceive of this problem. It is but one piece within ethics that we can use to question the world around us. And the reason why I bring up this idea of responsibility is because I think a lot of times, at least historically in recent memory, a lot of times these tech companies will say, well, we're not actually responsible for the harms that our technologies produce, because the algorithm made us do it. Like, they are essentially taking the responsibility that should be on them to watch out for those things and putting it on the technology and saying, the algorithm made us do it. So an example of this is, I don't know if you guys heard about the Apple Card scenario, but Steve Wozniak basically called them out because he and his wife, they share finances, they share the same accounts, there's nothing hidden there. They have the exact same financial standing. They both applied to get Apple Cards, and his credit limit was much, much, much higher than his wife's. And basically they called customer service and they're like, sorry, we can't do anything about this. Like, this is just how things turned out. And now the government is investigating Apple to see if it is in fact an algorithmic decision that was made that impacted his wife. And so that was, they didn't outrightly say like, no, we're not responsible, but I think that's generally the theme here, is that these companies are saying, we're not responsible, the algorithm made us do it. And this is really challenging. Like, this is wild. So I want to challenge us: whenever we hear ethical tech or ethical algorithms, try something out, replace the word algorithm or replace the word technology with the word toaster. And the reason I say this is because, like, toasters and algorithms are just machines and systems that people create, right? They're not, you can't write to the algorithm and say like, hi, I got a much lower credit limit, and like try to appeal to the algorithm. It doesn't work. But what you can do is appeal to the people behind the algorithm. And I think that's why it's really, really, really important that we focus on kind of putting this responsibility, at least when we see this stuff in the news, when we encounter it on social media, that we do the exercise of putting that responsibility back onto the collective, of people who deployed that technology and developed it. And so breaking this down into philosophical terms, most philosophers agree that for a person to be considered morally responsible for the outcomes of an action, they have to meet two conditions. The first of which is the freedom condition, and the second of which is the epistemic condition. So the freedom condition essentially says that, okay, for you to be considered morally responsible, you have to have made that decision of your own volition. You couldn't have been like coerced into it. If you were coerced into taking a certain action, then you're absolved of responsibility. But if it was your own action, then you have one of the conditions met to be considered morally responsible. So that's freedom condition. The epistemic condition is a little trickier, and I think this is where a lot of philosophers do like to argue with each other. There are four kind of forms of the epistemic condition that I can think about that are kind of disputed, but one of them I'll bring up because it does get invoked by these tech companies. In this version of the epistemic condition, it says, for you to be morally responsible for an action, it had to have been your own action, which is the freedom condition, but you also had to have known and understood the rightness and wrongness of your action. So you had to understand, you have to have kind of like some kind of moral opinion about the thing that you did. You say, oh yeah, this action is either right or wrong. And what ends up happening with these companies is that they say, well, we didn't know that this was going to happen. We didn't know that women were going to be given lower credit limits. We didn't know that, that there was the potential for women to be shown lower paying jobs through advertisements. We didn't know, so we're not responsible. And I'll be honest, like this is kind of plausible. It really is a little bit plausible because like, I don't think it's possible for you to sit there and be like, okay, this action could have this outcome and this outcome and this outcome, and you list every single thing out. And like, I think that is really challenging. But I think that's also how these tech companies, they take advantage of that and they skate by this so-called epistemic condition and absolve themselves of responsibility. And so I actually want to introduce this new concept, a more demanding epistemic condition that a professor of mine last year introduced. He works on algorithmic fairness. So he tries to make these algorithms more fair. He basically translates like fairness into mathematics, which just blows my mind. Either way, his idea for this more demanding epistemic condition is essentially saying, if you could have found out about the potential impacts and the potential outcomes, then you are responsible for finding them out. If you could have found them out, then you are responsible for finding them out. And you are also responsible for mitigating the potential harms in the development process. And so that's one way, that's one idea that I wanted to introduce to you so that you can pressure test these companies' arguments. So if you see something like the Apple Card scenario in the news, this kind of stuff happens in increasing amounts. So I'm sure it'll come up in the news again. But I want you to kind of take that with you and use it to pressure test these companies' arguments. And so if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat because I know this is a lot. It is super heavy and I did my best to kind of condense things and pull out the salient points. But right now I kind of want to ask you all some questions because I honestly, as much reading and work and talking about the stuff that I've done, I don't have all the answers. And I really want, because I know we have such a diverse group here, people from all walks of life and all sorts of backgrounds, which is fucking like literally so amazing. I can't look at your pictures right now because I will start crying. And I really want to get your perspectives on this because I don't have the answers. And I also want to note that like, if you leave this ethics section with more questions than answers, that is exactly the point. Like, because I want to like teach us how to question these things that kind of appear in our world. So I want to get your perspective on like, do you think that these app developers, and by that I mean the companies, do you think it's important for them to be thinking about downstream impacts? Do you think it's important for them to sit there and go through the scenarios, and should we be holding them responsible for it? Or is it good enough for the developers to stick their collective head in the sand and say like, we didn't know, so we're not going to do anything about it, and we're not responsible. Super curious to hear everyone's thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself, participate. Alejandra says, yes, we should definitely hold them responsible. I agree.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Red. What's up? I also work in information security, so I feel like I might have a little insight here. But obviously, I do think that the developers have an accountability where they need to kind of think about the downstream impacts of the work that they're doing. I think part of the problem, and I think Psycho is working to solve some of this too, is that we don't have diverse enough people represented in the rooms. So there's all kinds of health apps that don't account for people who might get periods on a monthly basis, right? Like we see so many examples of this. But one question that I had for all of you is like, I've been a longtime user of CoStar. It's like, I'm a queer person. It's how we know. I was telling Taz over Instagram that it's how we know we like each other is if you ask for CoStar information on the first date so we can see compatibility. So I know that CoStar has been like a very, very small team up until recently. And so I kind of have some compassion for them that maybe they couldn't prioritize a privacy policy. And so they just used that generic language. So like, what would your recommendation be to these startups, to these developers who can't really prioritize digging into privacy and are just using like information that's already out there?
Gato, you can answer.
Go for it. You have thoughts.
I think that there are a couple of different ways that we can attack this, right? And Red, you know, in InfoSec, we realize that the privacy dialogue is very, very much isolated from the security dialogue. A lot of people assume that cybersecurity and privacy are synonymous, and they are not. There could be extremely secure networks and the company is not private, or they're not caring about consumer data protection, right? And that's where these privacy policies come in and affect communities at large. I would say for small organizations, my biggest recommendation is what we've created here at Cyber Collective and what we're trying to do as an organization. So our goal, shameless plug, is to educate the community, create this research, and then have these organizations leverage small groups like ourselves to do beta testing, to get information and feedback. And I think that, you know, I don't know if CoStar's team, a lot of folks put a privacy policy up, like you said, they kind of like copy and paste it, and that to check a box. That's what a lot of privacy compliance is. Some of them aren't selling your data, right? Like a lot of them are not selling your data. But the fact that they have that privacy policy and that language exists, then as an individual, when you're looking at this, you should assume that they are, because they have the opportunity to, and they're making sure that they check those liability boxes for themselves. You know, my recommendation would be send an email to CoStar as a consumer, as a user of CoStar, and say, hey, I know you have a privacy policy. I'm learning a lot about consumer data protection because legislation is coming out around it. And I'm wondering, do you all have your privacy policy? Was it kind of a checkbox, or are you all selling this data? Very curious to know. And that kind of like goes into the next pieces of what we're going to talk about. But that's my first recommendation. And as organizations and how they carry the responsibility for this, it's the reason I feel like most companies aren't asking questions, thinking about things in an ethical fashion, it's because we aren't demanding it. Most change is driven by consumer demand. And so if we learn ourselves and we can demand these changes and this information, then it'll happen. And that's why we have this group and this organization to educate so that we can demand. But I feel you, Red, like, I know that a lot of people don't have bad intention, and this, you know, even astrology is rooted in historical ancestral practices, right? And a lot of people go into that with that intention. And I'm a big believer of the quote, like, you have to do the things that you need to do in order to do the things that you want. And sometimes apps need to sell data to make money, to change the world, to do something else. But that's where the ethics and the question, like, whose responsibility is it? But I hope I answered your question a little bit. I know I went around. There isn't an exact, but those are just my thoughts. Would love more questions. What I would ask somebody else in the group that's attending, like, what would be your recommendation after hearing this and attending our events? What would you say would be the ethical thing to do in this regard? I know I got a lot of talking ass people on here because y'all be in my DMs all day when I don't have time, and now I do. So go ahead and get it going.
Hi, this is Alejandra. So I mean, a recommendation that I would say, I don't know if this works, but I know that if a lot of people go out and do this, like you were saying, Tass, like it's gonna help the collective. Emailing, I've also emailed my senators, my state senators and my representatives saying like, we need laws that protect our data, because this is so irresponsible that you guys are not holding these big companies like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accountable for our data. That's like my data. So I think that's something that we can also do.
I love that. Legislation is such a large part of the answer to all of this. So I completely agree. Does anybody else have any feedback, or what are your thoughts after hearing all of this? Or Gato, if you had another question that was more ethics driven, I can allow you to ask it.
I have a,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead, please.
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt you, Gato. I think the question would be like, I understand emailing, things like that, but for those who may not be super digitally literate that can create email, and especially if this is affecting POC folks or things like that, like what is the alternative for them to be able to put this pressure onto companies? Because it's not super an option to be able to like write a lengthy email compared to just filling in some information on an app. And then also, I feel I lean on the other side of like where this can go. And I was thinking of like, if information is leaked or if it's sold to somebody else, this could lead to astrology being on like an alternative type of thing, like being open to like holistic or like alternative medicine kind of hoax and things like that being sold to folks as like part of this demographic and things like that. That's also something that comes to mind for me. And it's like, then how can they separate the information that's like what's good and what isn't? So those are just thoughts that I've.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because I didn't get a chance to like do a deep dive and read this, but I also just like saw briefly an article that was like explaining the link between the wellness community on social media and QAnon and those conspiracy theories. And like there is like a big crossover of people who like believe in both of those things. So like, yeah, I think that's such a good point.
And then, sorry, one more thing that I forgot.
Yeah,
actually,
please.
I saw on Instagram for Sanctuary, which is another app, that they've actually had issues where they've stolen content from astrologers that are POC and then, you know, reposted it, or like images, visuals from them. So it's always a question of like, well, are they aware or where is this coming from? Or I should say, who's creating or who's behind? Because I don't know who's actually the creator of CoStar.
We say this a lot, just like in our cyber collective group chat, horrified but unsurprised, because it's like, this isn't surprising anymore, but it's every time it's like, oh, I feel that in my body. But yeah, thank you so much for that. And Taz, I don't know if you have other questions. I do have more ethical questions, but like, I know we're kind of short on time right now. Feel free to email me, DM me on Instagram if you want to talk more about this stuff, because I love this. I love getting to just have conversations about this with people like us. But I'll give it to you, Taz, now.
Yeah, Arlene, those were so insightful. And so much of what you brought up is exactly what we're trying to answer through this research that we're doing. And that's why we're collecting some of this ethnographic information, because what we're trying to figure out is, all right, policies are being created, things are happening. Are they creating policy thinking of undocumented immigrants? I have family in my life that are undocumented immigrants today, right now. My oldest sister is an undocumented immigrant. And how is certain surveillance technology, policy for that? Like there's so much that has to go along with this and these ethical conversations. And, that's why our goal, right, like as the slide says, is to help you conceptualize what data privacy means, how it affects your daily lives, and connecting those right dots, because we can't wait for somebody else to make change for us. Either you got to pull up and do that shit yourself, or you got to find the right people that are willing to do it. And so we're doing it, but we can't do it alone. And that's why we have these meetups, so that we can educate, to get everybody together, right? And make sure that we are understanding, Taz announcing that on Zoom got me nervous. Don't worry, girl. I dare somebody. But that, like, all of that are things to consider. And that's why we're doing continued research. And we're so excited for what's to come in January for y'all. Like, so excited. And we hope to have your continued support and your patience through this, this lull. But let me jump into the tools, right? Because Arlene, I think what you asked was a great segue into figuring out how we handle everything that's happening. And I mean, every event, after every video I make, and I think that our just collective response to all of this is digital mindfulness, and understanding that slowing down, clicking consciously, sharing consciously, giving away your data consciously is really, really important. And understanding that question, like, do I have to do this? Do I need this for something right now? And if you do, there is an element of, yes, you gave your data away for that moment, but you can go back into the application. You can ask to delete your information on the app. You have a right to access what data that they collect. That this is legislative, right? But certain applications, depending on what state that you're in, you have the opportunity to delete, access your data, and then also correct any misinformation that might be presented about you. It's a long and hefty process that they don't make easy purposely, because they don't want it to be easy. And but some apps are good, and that will also be a gauging factor, right? Red, you asked about CoStar and their small team. See what they say if you ask your data to be deleted, and how they react. I think those are elements that we could dig into as well. But from a legislative perspective, there are, I think, 16 policy legislation or addendums that are being pushed through right now. CCPA is one of the biggest ones that we have. I don't know all of the states that have privacy legislation across the board, but we have shared a newsletter, and we'll share it again today. IAPP.org, I believe, shares exactly what state has what types of privacy laws that you can look into, and what rights you have in those states. But as of right now, we don't have a national consumer data protection law that exists. And our goal is to change that. And we're going to make the noise to make it happen, hopefully sooner than later. And so going into the technology and what you can leverage, the markup is a really good resource that you can use to get information on what's happening in big tech. Elroy is a consumer data privacy platform that has not been released yet. It is releasing in January. I've been working with the incredible founder, Rachel Cash, to get this going for everyone. And this tool itself is going to allow you to track exactly what data is being collected, what organization is collecting what, and then teach you, and on your behalf, send the emails for your right to either delete, access, or correct any information. So it's a really, really cool platform that's coming out, and it's founded by a Black woman and a team of all Black and brown people, which I've never seen before. And I'm so thankful to be a part of it. And then lastly, EFF's Privacy Badger. It's a great, EFF is just a great organization to follow at large, but Privacy Badger is also a great tool. And there are some other privacy tools that are coming up as well, which we can send some more information about in the newsletter. I'm rambling because we're on time and I want to make sure that I take time. Ooh, my bad. That was my timer. It was really aggressive. I want to make sure to take time to introduce our wonderful sound bath that is coming up right now. And Melissa Varela is a certified crystal healer and owner of the Universal Crystals, a holistic lifestyle brand that offers a wide variety of accessories to uplift your mood and protect your energy and heal your soul. We're going to drop her Venmo, Instagram, and all of her social media information in the chat and her website. But if you want tonight, you can get a 20% off if you use Cyber Collective for any of the stuff. And she's here and giving her time tonight. So without further ado, Melissa, if you can pop in and do your thing. Thank you so much for being here.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me too? I just want to make sure you can see me.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm so grateful for you guys. Thank you for having me on here today. Like you mentioned, I hand make crystal jewelry. So I wire wrap necklaces. I make crystal bracelets. I put together custom kits. I do custom requests. And I recently just got certified as a certified crystal healer. So if anyone's interested in crystals or learning a little bit more about crystal healing, feel free to hit me up. I'm based in San Diego, but I'm originally born and raised from New Jersey. So I'm still fairly new to San Diego. So I still have my Jersey style, I guess, or Jersey swag, if you like to say it like that. But if you're from the East Coast, feel free to say hello. If you're in San Diego, feel free to say hello. So for today's sound bath, we're gonna focus on our root chakra and our heart chakra. I just ask that you find a place where you're comfortable. You can close your eyes or you can keep your eyes open. And think about one thing you are grateful for today. And we're gonna take one big deep breath in and out. So when you're ready, you're gonna take a deep breath in and exhale. Let's do that one more time. So inhale and exhale. And just relax. And I'd like to end this sound bath with a beautiful grounding mantra. I am safe, I am secure, and I am grounded. Thank you.
Melissa, thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I didn't even realize how badly I needed that. Like, truly, thank you so much. I felt that shit in my toenails.
For sure, girl, for sure. I got you. Every Tuesday I do this as well on Instagram. So if you ever need to
Oh, amazing.
get yourself balanced.
Perfect. And we will share your information and your Instagram on our social media tonight for sure, and in the newsletter as well. I just wanted to take a second again to just truly thank everyone for being here, and also thank the Cyber Collective team. I don't think y'all realize, like, I could cry saying this right now, like how much work these incredible women have been putting in. And Cyber Collective was born from a place of my own loneliness, and to have a space where we are all connected, and to have the team that I am so deeply moved by their intellect, their resilience, and their continued effort to impact. There are not a lot of shorties that are willing to put in full-time work hours to put these events together, to put briefs together while going to school, while also being in full-time jobs and taking care of family, because we all women of color. So, you know, we about the family in here. And with all of that responsibility, like, I'm just incredibly thankful and in debt to all of you. So Vanessa, Maggie, Farah, Rebecca, Caroline, I love y'all deeply. Thank you for being able to create such a beautiful, beautiful space for all of these people to join us. And thank you all for being here and supporting us. January is going to be really, really exciting. And so we hope that you can stay patient with us as we plan, because everything that we do it with you in mind. Once again, y'all, stay safe, stay secure, and have a great new year and great holidays. And we will see you at the top of the year. Thank you all so much.